All right, Alexander, let's answer the questions from the live stream with Angelo and Brian from the New Atlas, Angelo Giuliano and Brian Berletic. And let's start things off with Henry Walker, who says the banksters want to genocide the European race. Alan Shepard Page says, I don't understand why Russia doesn't open another front line from Sumy towards Kiev. The Ukraine army will drop east and south Ukraine to defend the capital.
Well, we talked about that, and I think Brian and Angelo discussed this. I mean, these are we don't know what the Russian strategies are going to be. Don't exclude that possibility. It might happen.
Yeah. From John Dickinson, who says, been watching for years. Thanks for your amazing efforts. Please give a shout out to Levan Gudadze, upcoming EN language news channel from Russia.
Right.
Thank you very much for that. Shout out to Levan. Lover of the Russian team, thank you for that super sticker. Maria says, thank you for all that everyday hard work. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria, for super sticker. Rochas, thank you for that super sticker. Jochrin, thank you for that super sticker. Ralph, thank you for that super chat. Trevelin Gale, thank you for that super sticker. Danielle says it was great to see Brian on Australian news recently commenting on AUKUS or USUKA. We have lost our political minds here in Australia. Thank you for this amazing panel, for the work you all do.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
No.
Bob, thank you for that super sticker. Valies, thank you for that super chat. Jake Spreck, thank you for that super chat. Terrace Thesis says, both NATO and Russia are using AI to run this war, but the NATO AI is sabotaging them, saying, yeah, you're going to win. One more sanctions package.
Very good.
Thank you for that. Darlene says, in the churches, we hear missionaries talk about the extreme persecution of Christians in China, often leading to deaths. How much truth is there to this?
I don't know. When I went to China, which admittedly was back in 2017, and I visited Shanghai, I was surprised actually at the fact that I did actually see functioning churches there and how active they were. But I'm not going to pretend that I know more, more than just, that very superficial information. I don't know the detail of what's going on. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there were problems with some of the churches. And I've heard that the Catholic Church isn't permitted to practice in China, that the Chinese authorities made it very clear that any churches in China that practice should not accept the authority of the Pope. Now, that's my understanding of it. If anybody wants to tell me that that's wrong, they're welcome to.
All right. Cross-eyed Sniper says, Existential, is it enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system? For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford.
Oh, gosh, okay, well, who am I to argue with Henry Ford on an issue like that? So, mind you, that was said a long time ago. It's presumably, 100 years ago now? But, perhaps things haven't changed that much in those 100 years.
Miss Texas G says, I think locals is down.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
It was down for the stream and it came back up. Yes, thank you, Miss Texas G, for that. Ralph says, do you guys still accept the USD?
Yeah, of course we do.
Sure. Missy, thank you for that super chat. Radovid, thank you for that super sticker. William says, when will the dollar drop? When will the US drop Ukraine, leaving Europe and the UK holding the baby?
That's a very good question. Now, I mean, all the indications are that everything now is riding on this spring-summer offensive that Ukraine is talking about launching, and which I'm sure it will launch. Now, if this offensive fails, and what I mean by failure is if it fails to achieve its objective, if it's not able to knock the Russians out of the war, if it's not able to put Ukraine in a military position where it can dictate terms to Russia, then it seems to me we have a crisis, because it's clear that the West cannot sustain a long war in Ukraine. We've now had a succession of reports starting with that Rand Corporation report, which says that. We've seen granular information now coming from the Pentagon leaks, which confirms it. So we have a crisis. And what does the United States do? Does it walk away and leave the Europeans floundering? Does it try and find some other way to escalate, which I don't even want to try and speculate about? Or does it finally do that which it should have done so long ago, which is try and find a diplomatic solution, assuming, of course, that by that point the Russians are interested in one? But I think these are questions which are difficult to answer at the moment, because it's very difficult to enter into the mind of the neocons and of the president himself. All I can say for the moment is that at the moment they've put all their money on this offensive. I don't think they have a plan B. I don't think they fully know what they're going to do. If it fails, they might try and involve Poland in the conflict, which we talked about extensively in another program. I think that's certainly a view that's gaining traction amongst some of the neocons. But as I said, whether that's all going to come together in the autumn, we'll just have to wait and see.
Sanjeva says, just want to say thank you, Alex, Alexander, and Brian. And Kilo One Co says another train derailment happened in Minnesota.
Oh dear.
Yes, that happened as well. Yov, thank you for that super chat. CP Lai, thank you for that super chat. And Alex K says, instead of China and Russia, I think the U.S. will go all out in the Middle East, targeting Iran and getting countries like Saudi Arabia back in line in an attempt to reassert their dominance. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's not impossible at all. I mean, if you lose in one place, start a war somewhere else. I mean, it's a classic neocon strategy. And of course, the Middle East for them is unfinished business that's going badly wrong. So it's not impossible. And it could be that they might try and do that. I think if they do that, if they try and gamble in that way, with the Middle East turning out as negative for them as it has previously done, then they will be piling folly upon folly, and we will have further protests in the United States, and I think even more protests in Europe, actually. I think the European public, which has been to some extent pulled along by the Ukraine thing, they won't be happy with an intervention in the Middle East. So that's all I can say at the moment. But, if they do that, we shall see. It's not impossible.
Arius 333, thank you for that super sticker. Summer 1970, thank you for that super sticker. James Hal 9000, thank you for that super sticker. From Pirate Fish, it was pointed out to me that escalation towards war started in 2001 or earlier. In space, the race for communications, premium orbits, rockets, wars between major powers will include space-based weapons and communications.
Well, I'm not going to go into the technology. I'm sure you're right in this. I'm sure that all these advanced technologies and space-based technologies will increasingly be used. But preparation for the war starting in 2000, 2001, I think at that time the United States was principally focused on the Middle East, actually, and China as well, less so about Russia. So I don't think that was quite what they were, they were looking at Russia. But of course, it was about that time that the United States pulled out of the ABM treaty and tried to, I think, began the process of tearing up arms control treaties. And I suppose that could fit into that chronology as well.
BFT Eyes Wide says, Russia will prevail, no question there. China is capable to sustain any threat, including military, from the West. The biggest questions are there any leaders within the collective West that is capable to shift unrealistic, childish, yet dangerous push towards catastrophic outcome? And which Western country will take the first step towards realistic acceptance and start a normalization dialogue with Eurasia?
This is an exceptionally good question. The first part of it, I think we can answer. There is no Western leader who is at the moment up to that kind of thing. I mean, the nearest approximation we have to one is Emmanuel Macron. And merely mentioning his name is enough to tell you that we don't have a Western leader that's capable of doing that sort of thing. Look at the mess he's made in China. I mean, he goes to China, he goes to, wag his finger at the Chinese, tell them, don't, get too close to the Russians. The Chinese listen, they sigh, they're bored by all of these things. Then they are able to sweet talk him, and he says all these nice things about China and the United States and all the rest. And now, surprise, surprise, I gather he's trying to back off a bit. He's trying to sort of go back on some of these things that he said after his trip to China. Well, if that's the best we can do in the West in terms of independent leadership, we haven't got anybody who's got that kind of independent leadership. Nonetheless, I do think France perhaps has more capacity for producing other leaders who might be prepared to take an independent line, only it won't be Macron.
Yeah. Belladonna, thank you for that super sticker. Meg Galucci, thank you for that super sticker. Wendy Sheets, thank you for that super sticker. Zahir, thank you for that super chat. Archie asks, it is a sad time for Ukraine to destroy their origins, the Ukraine Orthodox Church.
I completely agree. I mean, it's a tragic time for Ukraine and for Orthodoxy.
Summer of 1970 says, as the Beatles song goes, give you everything I got for a little peace of mind. So sick of our deranged Western leaders.
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
E82 says, Nigerian government refused to release indigenous peoples of Biafra, Mazi Namdi Kanu, after courts ordered of release and payment should be made to him.
Are you surprised? I'm not.
A different perspective says, seems the U.S. was betting on Russia's fall as the deterrent for China. Huge miscalculation because China got stronger. And also Russia and the world is too.
Absolutely. This is completely correct. Can I just say, I've just come doing this program now. I've just come out of another program in which I've been discussing what has happened with the former Indian ambassador to Moscow. And he's made exactly that point, that, what the war has actually done is that it has given China more political space. It's made China an even stronger leader in international affairs than it had been before. So I think you're absolutely right. It's not worked out. It's not worked out at all as intended. And the Chinese at the moment are the big winners.
Peter Liu says, can you guys talk about Spanish PM and Macron Ursula in China?
Well, I think we've talked about that extensively. This endless procession of Western leaders. Baerbock, by the way, is the latest one. She's now in China. I mean, they're all going to Beijing, to the court of the emperor. I take that back. Xi Jinping is not the emperor. But anyway, they all go to China. They all go and, perform the kowtow. I take that back. They're not performing the kowtow. They're meeting the president of China. They're, having, and his officials. And they're all talking about Ukraine, and the Chinese not giving them anything on Ukraine. All that it's doing, yet again, is that it's proving how important China has become in the international system, and the fact that more and more of the world, even the Europeans, are now starting to see China as the rising power. And of course, in the meantime, the Chinese aren't talking to Biden. They're refusing to pick up the phone to him. They're not talking to Zelensky. Well, why would they bother? They're not prepared to receive Blinken, and they're not prepared to speak to Lloyd Austin either. I mean, all these European leaders are going to China, but the Americans can't get through. And the idea of a conversation between Xi Jinping and Zelensky, well, that's all been forgotten.
Peter Wood says Angelo is correct about voting in EU democracies.
Yeah.
JF, thank you for that super sticker. Osax, thank you for that super chat. A different perspective says colonial lenses. It's 2023, but with 1700 behavior.
Yeah.
And Lada Morale says, do you think that elections in the West are still an effective way to change the course away from the WEF agenda, or the only choice for people to rise in revolution? Thanks.
I still hold that elections have their purpose, and I'm not good. I'm never someone to rush into revolution. I think people who talk about revolutions should understand what a cataclysmic event a revolution is. If you've experienced one, and I've known people who've lived through the Russian Revolution, I can remember hearing discussions from a former British academic called Alec Nove, who was there in St. Petersburg when the revolution happened, and as a young boy. So they are cataclysmic events. We should not seek them or wish them. That doesn't mean they might not come to pass, but in the meantime, we should abide by our laws, use our democracies, try to preserve our democracies, and certainly participate in our elections. And if the parties that used to exist aren't functioning in the way that they should, we should come together and create new ones.
Pierre De Rose, thank you for that super chat. Beto Macedo, thank you for that super chat. Hello from Brazil. And Greg says, thank you guys so much for the time and honesty you put into your reporting. I listen every day. I know who all the leaders of Europe are, and many thanks, and many in Asia. Thanks. Thank you, Greg, for that. Tone says, great guests, but would still love to see UK columns Alex Thompson guest on the channel.
Okay, we might try.
Lado Moreau says, many thanks to the Duran team for inviting Brian and Angelo. I always listen to their live streams too. Very interesting conversation. Thank you for that. Dean Noss says, fantastic discussion as usual, gentlemen. In Australia, you would be shocked at how much the public is uninformed on the actual reality in Ukraine. Meanwhile, here we are deindustrializing for the rain and sun gods.
Sounds like Britain. I'm sorry to hear that about Australia, I have to say, because I've always had good feelings about that country. But as I said, it's no different here in Britain.
Balikov, thank you for that super chat. Russell Hall says the subsidization of U.S. healthcare through insurance and government programs created a hybrid model which allowed costs to inflate far beyond affordable.
Yeah, I've heard many people say this.
Jeff Bickford says, thanks, and to the moderators. Thank you, Jeff, for that. Balikov says, not to be negative, Nelly, but shouldn't we acknowledge that long-term, the collective West will be able to outproduce Russia, both in military production and a population base to recruit from?
Well, I think we answered that over the course of the program, and I think we gave a fairly complete answer, actually. But I'm just going to say again, I mean, last couple of days, there's been reports about how the United States has been driven to go to South Korea and borrow, whatever that means, 500,000 155mm shells from South Korea, because apparently it needs them to deplete, to supplement its already depleting arsenals. Does that sound to you like a military industrial behemoth of the kind that the United States once was, able to produce weapon systems at enormous quantities and submerge everybody else by its production? Well, that's not how it sounds to me. It sounds like somebody who's frittered away his inheritance and is going around with a begging bowl asking his former friends to help him out, because that's how it looks to me. I can't describe it in any other way. Now, we gave a substantive reply to this program on the program itself to this question. I think increasingly it's clear that this can't happen, and it seems that the EU's plan to increase production of 155mm shells, that's also collapsed.
From Lada Moreau, the West can only outpass Russia in military production if Russia stops its own, plus natural resources that the West does not have.
Yeah, I agree. Since we did the program, by the way, I've been contacted by a few people who've actually had experience. I mean, these are, I should stress, British people who have visited these factories, some of these factories, including the Chelyabinsk tractor factory, which is now apparently being activated. And he told me about what I experienced myself, the enormous scale of these factories and the way in which they can be utilized and set back into production. He mentioned, for example, that he visited one factory where there were huge rows of machine tools standing idle. One set of machine tools building Grad rockets. These are these rockets that are launched from multiple rocket systems. These are the simple ones. But only one of this huge bank of machine tools was actually being used. And, a whole hall of them, a whole hall of, filled with these machine tools, production hall. And he said, if you start activating, putting all of these machine tools back to work, then again, the production volumes will simply explode. Now, of course, you can't do that immediately. Some of these machine tools might require some repair. All kinds of things might need to be done. But that's the kind of overcapacity that Russia has and which we don't have in the West.
Elza says, rule for leaders of the collective West. The bigger the protests in your country, the more you increase the help for Ukraine. True for Germany and France.
Yes, agreed. Excellently said.
Robin R., thank you for that super chat. Tim Gibson, thank you for that super sticker. Elza says, what about the breaking news, the spy from the Wall Street Journal? Was he as innocent as the U.S. drone above the Black Sea?
I'm going to say what I think about this. I think he probably was a journalist, not a spy. And remember, he is under charges, so he has the... we must assume him guilty until he's proved innocent. And I haven't... Sorry, you must assume innocent until he's proved guilty. The Freudian slip, maybe. But anyway, we've got to assume him innocent until he's proved guilty. We haven't seen the evidence so far. I suspect that this was a very ambitious journalist. He went to Yekaterinburg. He was researching stories about Russian cruise missile and tank production. He asked the wrong questions of the wrong people, tried to get papers. He was intending to write this all up as a big exclusive at the Wall Street Journal, hoping to win who knows what prize. And of course, the Russian authorities perceived it as espionage, and they arrested him on that basis. I doubt that he was working for the CIA or, the US intelligence community. But if I'm wrong, I won't be too surprised either.
Matless X says, working in the utilities industry here in the US, I can tell you that we are at a shortage of engineers, technicians, craftsmen. We would need a generation to remotely catch up to just Russia.
Yes, I agree with that completely, actually. I should say that, I have some familiarity with one of the great engineering schools in Russia, which is the Bauman Institute. And there's a rival to the Bauman, by the way. Bauman is located in Moscow. There's a comparable school in St. Petersburg. And they churn out engineers. I mean, engineering has never lost its attractiveness. And Putin, in a recent meeting, it's never lost its attractiveness in Russia. And Putin, in a recent meeting with industry executives, spoke about the need to increase numbers of engineers even more. And of course, China produces engineers on a far bigger scale than Russia does. And so this is what we're up against in the West.
Brent D says, the EU, the Anglosphere, and Asian allies have the population, the natural resources, and the manufacturing capacity to match China and Russia. They lack unity, will, and leadership.
Well, yes, but where is unity, will, and leadership going to come from? I think that game is lost, actually.
OMG Puppy says, Banana Republic checklist, political censorship, propaganda replaces news, rigged elections, political prisoners, arrest opposition party leaders, disarm citizenry. We're down to the last one.
Yeah.
Stewart says, my hunch is that the conflict in Ukraine was instigated by the U.S. to pressure Russia into abandoning support for Iran and Syria. Is there any truth to this? Is Iran vital to Russia, worth enduring years of war and sanction?
Well, I think the short answer is that I think it was partly that, but only a small part of, only to a limited degree. To the neocon plan was not to pull Russia away from Iran. Remember, Russia voted for sanctions against Iran. Russia refused to provide S-300 missiles to Iran. Russia has criticized Iran over its nuclear program. The war has actually brought Russia and Iran closer together, not further apart. But I think the real purpose of the war was to break Russia's relationship with China. That was what it was about. Not Iran was a peripheral issue, though obviously an important one.
Saul Alanis says, hola amigos, gracias por la platica. Cactus Ray, thank you for that super sticker. Greg says, as a hockey fan from Michigan, we have come to love our NHL Russian hockey players. Why would we ever want to harm them or their families?
Well, quite, absolutely. And thank you for that humane and human statement.
Lumpia Logic says, did you see that anti-war protest against Taiwanese leader in New York? It was great.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's good that people are engaging in anti-war protests, and I hope we have more of them. And we should have many more of them in Europe too.
Matless X says, Angelo, they just don't have Lend-Lease with Taiwan and Ukraine. They have NATO countries, AUKUS, South Korea, and Japan.
It's true.
Island Popsicle says, we're in the middle of an extreme paradigm shift in the world. This feels like the last desperate fight of the West to prevent it.
I agree with that as well. I agree with that also. If I can just go back to that, I just come out of it, as I said, this interview with the Indian ambassador. He made exactly that point. He said that one of the great events that's happened, and it's been caused by this, is that Russia has now decided that its future is not with the West anymore. And it's going to it's now positive about the fact that it's going to re-establish links with other countries, India, China, those sort of countries. And he said that isn't going to change. So the war was exactly what you said. It was an attempt to prevent the loss of hegemony. And in fact, what it's doing is it's accelerating it.
Peter Liu says, no, I think they want to find a solution to the Ukraine war because this is having a devastating effect on Europe.
Well, I mean, it is having a devastating effect on Europe, but solutions I see few in evidence at the moment.
Amir says, should Zelensky be honored by Israel for avenging those perished in World War II at the hands of the Ukrainians?
Well, I'm not going to discuss this rather complex topic. Israeli relations with Ukraine are complex, to put it mildly. And of course, we all know the history about, on this program, I presume we all know the history of the relationship, of the role of the Bandera movement and of Ukrainian far-right groups in the events of the 1940s, in the Holocaust that took place then.
All right, we will end it there. Those are all the questions. Thank you, everyone who watched the show with Brian Berletic from the New Atlas and Angelo Giuliano. Thank you very much.